We are now 291 days away from the midterms. Today, President Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act and send active duty military troops into Minnesota in response to the ICE protests there. Trump wrote that many presidents have used the act before, and it would allow him to quickly put an end to the travesty that is taking place in that once great state. Trump is right that many presidents have invoked the act before, but not recently. It's only been used 3 times in the past 50 years. Ronald Reagan used it in 1987 when Cuban migrants in an Atlanta prison started a riot. And George H.W. Bush used it twice, once in 1989 when there was looting in the U.S. Virgin Islands in the aftermath of a hurricane, and then in 1992 during the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. The last time a president used the military over the objections of a state's governor was more than 60 years ago, when Lyndon Johnson deployed the National Guard to protect civil rights demonstrators in Selma, Alabama. Of course, Donald Trump's threat comes after an ICE agent shot a man in Minneapolis last night, leading to another round of massive community responses. Protesters are back out there now. This is a live look from our crew on the ground there. They tell us that so far tonight things have been relatively calm, but the mood is still very tense. And there's new reporting that ICE is using more aggressive and heavy-handed tactics in the city. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune reports local attorneys are getting dozens of complaints that ICE agents have wrongfully detained, threatened, and physically abused bystanders. Those bystanders say ICE agents are only getting more hostile as time goes on. Today, my colleague Vaughn Hilliard asked DHS Secretary Kristi Noem about some of those tactics used by ICE. Here's what she said.
Secretary Noem, are you okay with federal agents and officers violating people's Fourth Amendment rights by asking for papers without reasonable suspicion?
Every single action that our ICE officers take is according to the law and following protocols that we have used for years, that this administration has used, that the previous administration used. They are doing everything correctly, and over again in litigation in the courts, we've proven that they've done the right thing.
And just a bit later, Niall Stanage, the White House columnist for The Hill, asked White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt about those comments. Here's how that played out.
Earlier, you were just defending ICE agents generally, and earlier on, Secretary Noem spoke to the media, and she said, among other things, that they are doing everything correctly. 32 people died in ICE custody last year. 170 U.S. citizens were detained by ICE. And Renee Good was shot in the head and killed by an ICE agent. How does that equate to them doing everything correctly?
Why was Renee Good unfortunately and tragically killed?
Are you asking me my opinion? Because an ICE agent acted recklessly and killed her unjustifiably.
Oh, okay. So you're a biased reporter with a left-wing opinion.
What do you want me to do?
Yeah, because you're a left-wing hack. You're not a reporter. You're posing in this room as a journalist.
Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, people are concerned about a planned protest by a right-wing influencer that's coming up this weekend. It's called the March Against Minnesota Fraud, and many are worried the people planning to show up are planning to harass the Somali community there. In light of that and Trump's insurrection act threat, I should say, Governor Tim Walz is appealing to the president to turn the temperature down and stop the campaign of retribution. Walz is also asking the people of his state to speak out peacefully without fanning the flames. And with that, let's bring in our lead panel, Akayla Gardner, MS Now White House correspondent, Susan Glasser, staff writer for The New Yorker, and former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, who spent 25 years as a federal prosecutor. It's great to have all of you with me tonight. Akayla, I'm going to begin with you. So this is far from the first time Trump and his team have talked about invoking the Insurrection Act. But do you get a sense that things are different this time around? Is he serious?
Well, Antonio, you're right. He's talked about this many times before, including going back to his first term when he talked about using it in 2020 during the Black Lives Matter protest. He also talked about it last year when we saw a protest in Los Angeles against ICE raids there. He has never yet taken that step, but he did issue a fresh threat today. But the way the White House is talking about this right now is it's an option. They're calling it a tool that he has. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said she has had a conversation with him very recently about this, but she said she wasn't exactly sure. Her words were, I don't know how serious he is about using this in the interim. But As you mentioned in your intro as well, this usually comes at the request of local officials, and Minnesota officials have been very clear that they do not want to see an increase. In fact, they want to see ICE leave Minneapolis. And so that is what they are calling for. And Noam was also asked about the prospect if the president does invoke this and we see a flood of military personnel go into the city, will it cause more violence, more deaths? And she just moved the focus onto Governor Walz and blamed him, saying that he needs to do more to make the streets safe. So there's really been an effort to deflect and to point the finger at Democratic officials, even though Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey have continuously said they want protests to be peaceful. They're encouraging people, yes, to use their voices, but the White House has blamed them for some of the more tense interactions we've seen with federal agents.
So I want to make sure that folks know what you were just seeing on your screen there. That was a live look at Minneapolis as Akayla was setting the scene for what we're hearing from the White House. It appears that authorities there, federal agents, deployed flashbangs, possibly pepper spray. You see it right there. It appears that things are heating up on the ground there, as they have time and time again, both during the daytime in Minneapolis and at night. They are in front of the federal building in that city right now. Susan, as we watch all of this unfold, one of the things I think about a lot as I cover stories like this throughout Trump's 2 terms now, I remind myself that he's fundamentally a president, producer, entertainer, showman, in addition to, I guess, a politician. And I'm curious what you think, Susan, the story is that he's trying to tell there in Minneapolis.
Well, look, I tend to agree with that. And unfortunately, I think this is a spectacle of essentially state-sponsored violence that Donald Trump has produced for us. This is, in fact, an image that he wants us to see. You could say the question is, why does the president of the United States seem to bear a grudge against an entire state? Why has he vowed retribution against that state? But I think you're right to underscore the idea that what we're watching here is, frankly, the sort of dystopian vision of an American hellscape as conjured by Donald Trump from the very beginning of his political career. This looks to me like American carnage made manifest, unfortunately. And I think that it's this sort of spectacle of state violence. And now what is Trump doing in calling for potentially using the Insurrection Act? He's wanted to bring the active duty U.S. military into it from the beginning to reinforce his powers and to underscore the message that he's had actually from the beginning of this second term, which is that while America faces many threats around the world, the greatest threat that Donald Trump is focused on is what he's called the enemy within. And he has specifically said that the U.S. military should target civil disturbances like those that the U.S. government is right now creating in Minneapolis. So I look at this and I see the dystopia that Donald Trump wanted us to see, unfortunately.
Joyce, polling shows that the majority of Americans are incredibly frightened and uneasy with the images that we've seen coming out of Minneapolis. And we know that in states like California, lawmakers, governors, they're trying to figure out what they can do to rein some of this in, to try to change the relationship between federal authorities on the ground and the communities that they're supposed to protect and serve. In California, what they're trying to do there is basically give federal agents this sort of ultimatum: drop the mask, or you keep wearing it and you're going to lose your broad protections, your federal immunity, possibly end up in confrontations with local police departments that will be, put in a position to have to cite or arrest you. But is it that easy to go after federal agents when they're in the midst of immigration operations like this?
Well, first, we should talk about how crazy it is that we're talking about this scenario at all, because federal agents are taught to de-escalate in tense situations. They're not there to act like a match thrown into the gasoline, which is what we've been seeing for the last few days. And so states like California, which has passed a law that requires federal agents to take off their masks and identify themselves, have their backs against the wall. In some sense, they're trying to protect communities in the face of a federal government that's behaving in a way that's simply unlike anything they've previously experienced. You know, frankly, it's problematic. A judge has issued an injunction in California that prevents the state from enforcing its law while the lawsuit moves forward. And that's because of the Supremacy Clause, which prohibits the states from trying to enact laws that tell the federal government how it may behave. And frankly, these laws, California is not the only place that has enacted or is considering them. They may run into trouble in court on supremacy ground clauses. But Congress could do it. Congress could absolutely do it. There's been a little bit of conversation about it. New York Congressman Dan Goldman has been talking about laws that would require ICE to engage in constitutional policing, and Congress is where these laws need to come from.
Joyce, look at how militarized these officers are right now. It's incredibly striking. I've covered ICE, DHS for most of my career for the last 10 years. I kind of started out as an immigration reporter, spent a lot of time on the border. And historically, you know, ICE officers, they're often in plain clothes. They're even at times working indoors in offices, conducting interviews in the interior. And you think of Border Patrol as being this sort of more militarized arm, typically historically restricted to, say, 100 miles away from one of the borders, not in a city that's, I think, about 7 hours away from the closest border to Canada there. And the thing that strikes me is, you know, Border Patrol has been allowed, because of that sort of 100-mile zone around the borders, they are allowed to violate people's constitutional rights in ways that we've at least been led to believe or understand ICE officers could not. You know, you do not have the same Fourth Amendment protections when you're down at the border because of the border search exception. But now we see Border Patrol working hand in hand with ICE agents and other federal agencies in the interior. Does this raise new legal questions, sort of a new frontier for you?
You know, enforcement at the border, as you point out, has always been a little bit different. The rules are more lenient in some cases in that category, but constitutional rights are constitutional rights. And Antonia, I had the same reaction to watching this that you mentioned. You know, I've been legal advisor on a number of tense actions, including on immigration actions or on anti-violence sorts of roundups. I have never seen agents kitted out like this, full military gear, face masks, head shields, armed with that looks to be semi-automatic weapons that are out in many cases in this defensive sort of position that they've taken up. This looks more like an invasion, or it looks more like something that we would see in a foreign country that's characterized by violence than it looks like an American city. I find this to be deeply disturbing and deeply troubling. We know we've seen one American citizen killed by ICE agents. They claim it was justified. We've all seen the video. This sort of tense situation where these agents have been given license by their agency to engage in conduct that I think people in law enforcement would tell you amounts to unconstitutional policing. This is what's behind all of this. And so really it's the action of leadership of this president, of this DHS secretary, that's permitting and even suggesting that these agents should behave in this manner that's deeply alarming. Will there be civil suits over some of this behavior? Undoubtedly there will. But after people have been killed, after people have been subjected to illegal arrests, after people have suffered emotional distress, it's a little bit late for those civil suits to ameliorate the problems we're seeing right now.